Hey guys, my name's Gloria and welcome back to my channel. Before I start this video, I just want to say thank you to everyone who has entered my giveaway that I posted about a week ago or so, I think. There's still plenty of time to enter, so if you love horror non-fiction, reading about the history of horror, if you love bookmarks and also fiction books and pins and stickers and anything spooky, you can head over to the giveaway video and enter there. It is international, so anyone can enter. But today I want to talk about Serve Cold, but specifically my own story that I had in it. This is quite narcissistic, but I just want to talk about the idea behind it, how I came up with the story, how I went about writing it and refining it, mostly for myself and my own workings in writing, but also I think it is really interesting and it can be helpful to other writers, because you do get asked a lot of the times, where do you get your ideas, how did you come up with this? And so I think it would potentially be useful, or at least interesting, to other writers to see how all these things came together. So my story is called Water of Life, and it is the second last story in the anthology, and I haven't brought myself to I haven't worked up the courage to read it in paper form or even on the Kindle yet. It's still a little bit strange, and I'm also terrified of finding a glaring mistake that I missed that accidentally got printed, but I'm hoping there aren't any. You know, a couple of spelling mistakes I can live with, but nobody has pointed out any so far. So I'm just going to read just a little quote, just the two first paragraphs. So the hours slipped by too quickly for Samantha, the city sunlight fading into the countryside's deep black darkness outside her passenger window. Paul, who had lived in the city all his life, had never seen anything like it. He was used to falling asleep by the orange glow of a street light, driving roads that were illuminated even at night. Now he was taking blind corners into a void, just praying they didn't meet another car on the narrow and winding roads. The blind turns and high wild hedges made Samantha nervous, but they also made her wonder. If they did crash, would it be easier than jumping? She imagined a car barreling towards them, maybe even a truck, folding up the car's bonnet like an accordion. Yes, it would be a quicker jump, death, than jumping off a cliff. But it wasn't a guaranteed ending, and more than that, it wasn't the fucked up romantic demise that Paul had his heart set on. Those are the first two paragraphs of my story. That's all I've read of it since I sent it off for potential publishing. I think the first two paragraphs do pretty well, so gold star to me. Trigger warning, there is some talk of suicide and actual suicide in this story, so if you're not comfortable hearing about that, you can skip this video. It's totally fine. So the basic premise of the story is that we're seeing it from the perspective of this young woman, Samantha, who is on her way back to her hometown where she used to live, where she grew up, and she is with this guy named Paul who she has sort of fallen in with, and they have planned their suicide by jumping off a cliff in this sort of romanticized, poetic way. The story begins with them just driving up to the cliff, just reaching it after hours of sitting in a car and after days and weeks and months of planning exactly how they were going to do it. And the conflict mainly in the story is that Samantha's not fully committed. This is mostly Paul's idea. Samantha isn't happy with her life, she isn't happy with the way things are going, but she isn't at the same point that he is at. But how do you tell someone that whenever you have made a pact to be the person that they will do this thing with, this literally a huge step? So that's the basic premise of the story. How I came up with it and the reason I want to talk about it is because it's kind of interesting to me at least. So I was thankfully and luckily picked to be a young writer delegate representing the Irish Writers Centre at the Cork International Literary Festival, which is one of the oldest literary festivals in Europe, I think, and it happens in Galway every year. I was there in 2018. There's some drama happening at the minute because some hooligans stole the decorative pencils and they're trying to get them back by bribing them with cool pints. So if you're interested in that, you can find that on Instagram. But I was at this festival and I went to a talk by a writer who, I can't remember his name now, but he was a writer from Derry and he was talking about some of his work and his books, and I sort of snapped back into attention when he used a few words that were very specific to the area that he grew up in, which just happened to be right beside where I grew up on the border with Derry, and it just sort of flung me back to my childhood and was strange that I had forgotten these words, but they were still somewhere there in my brain and I completely understood them. I think the one that he used that really brought me to attention was clock, which is a word, I know, but that was a word that was used in my house to describe a small black beetle that you might find around the house or around your kitchen. So while I understood there was a clock on the wall that told the time, there was also a clock crawling across the floor, creeping me out. And it reminded me of these other words that my mother would use, like the tangles in your hair she called tartles and stuff, and it was just so weird having all of this brought back to me because when I moved to Dublin I stopped using these words obviously and they just sort of became dormant in my head. But there were so many of these different words and I tried starting to make a list about them and trying to figure out why I had forgotten them and stuff. And at the same time I was in this huge literary event surrounded by literary writers, and I wanted to sort of turn my hand at trying to write a strict literary fiction story. You know, I was meeting all of these people who had magazines and were publishers and stuff, and there were all these opportunities to get published in different places, but only if you were a literary writer and not a genre writer. So I thought, you know what, I'm gonna do a literary story. And I had this image in my head, can't remember where I got it from, but if you've seen The Ring, you've possibly seen it before, but basically just a woman standing on a cliff facing out towards the sea, and that image is quite powerful to me. It's quite powerful in folklore and in stories. There are so many stories of, you know, widows' bluffs, I think they call them, and people throwing themselves off cliffs. So that image and someone forgetting where they came from and having these words that mean so much to them but they can't use in their life now, and coming back to all of that, I sort of just melded those together and came up with this idea. And I think it originally was just Samantha. I don't think there was a Paul, but as the story grew and as I started writing it, things did change. So originally I was trying so many different ways to write it. It takes place with them just in the car and on the cliff, but I had it happening in a pub or back before the journey started. You know, if this is where my story starts now, I was starting it way back here or pushing on over here, trying so many different ways to get it to work, and it just wasn't working. And I was bringing it to my writing groups and stuff, and you know, I was getting good feedback on the writing, but it just didn't feel like a cohesive story to me. And it wasn't until the call for the anthology came out, and this story had a very cold feeling to me, that I thought, you know what, I'm gonna throw in a ghost and see if it works out. And it somehow did, and it's not that I just threw in some horror trope to try and shoehorn it in there. I do think that the ghost works in this. Like I said, I haven't read through it, so I possibly could have brought the ghost a little bit more into it, but kicking the literary thoughts I had in my head of writing high art, because only literary fiction is art, which obviously I don't agree with. I think it allowed me to actually write the story that I wanted to write, and eventually led to me getting it published, which is and always will be the goal. So in saying that though, I think that the beginning of my writing this story and having it start as trying to be a literary fiction story did definitely lead to the two main characters and what they're going through. A lot of writing in Irish literature today, like news stories and stuff, are about the struggles for young people, young adults, to find jobs here. There's a lot of emigrating. Again, when I was younger, there was a huge number of people emigrating to Australia and stuff, and it's sort of happening again, mainly because no one can buy houses, and it's just sort of a, you know, climate change, global warming. It's all a bit depressing, and to be honest, literary fiction is always very depressing. It's rare to actually read a happy story about happy people. So that definitely did have an impact on the story that I was writing. And when I brought the ghost in, who's called the Ban Bon in this, the woman in white, she is sort of a generic ghost. It wasn't a specific folklore or anything that I'd heard, but I think it is sort of a universal theme of this woman in white, and I think there is sort of a folkloric trope of having a cliff top be haunted by someone who either had a love lost at sea or who fell from the cliff top or whatever. So I think that sort of helped readers get into it, possibly, I'm hoping, because if you're not from Ireland, these specific little things, you might not get them, but the idea of this woman in white ghost is sort of universal in a lot of countries. Another thing that I wanted to bring into the story is, through the theme of suicide, the difference. Now, that this was a fact that I heard of years ago, so might not be the case anymore, but I have a feeling that it is, the fact that when it comes to suicide, men are more likely to actually follow through with the act, and women are more likely to attempt suicide but not actually end their life. And this is due to a number of factors, but it's mainly due to, I think, the methods of suicide. Men tend to choose methods that are, you know, very final. There's no way of getting out of these. There's no way of anyone helping them, whereas women choose sort of methods that last longer, take longer to act, and can potentially get help out of them, and can potentially be cries for help rather than a very final full stop. And I thought that was a morbid but interesting fact, and I wanted to sort of show that in this story, that you can be feeling on the verge of something and not follow through with it, and you can be very similar people in similar situations and you know, the end result can be very different. And also how for Samantha in the story, you know, having no support system and having we don't have a great track record for mental health resources in Ireland, it can lead to many bad decisions and getting pulled into things like this that you wouldn't do if you were in your right mind, but unfortunately you're not, so it could have ended very differently for Samantha in this story if she had had any of those resources or any sort of other pathway that she could see. And this also parallels in with the story of the Bán, and there are actually two different sides of her story. One of them is the more socially accepted, more public story, and the other one is one that's passed down through the women in the community. So Samantha actually tells this to Paul and then immediately feels like she's made a mistake because they're not supposed to pass this on to the men. Not that the men would believe it anyway, I think, but her story is one version of her being in love with this man who goes off to sea and she never sees again, and she is so distraught she throws herself off a cliff. And the other one is her being sort of forced to marry someone that she doesn't want to marry, and in order to claim back her life she ends it her own way. And you know, there's so many stories like that in history of women doing things and then the story being twisted to be more about a man than about them. So I liked the twist in that, but it does parallel with her story because in the first one at least it shows a depression and a bad thing happening, completely changing the course of her life and ending it when it didn't actually need to go that way. And you know, she had had the resources, things would have ended for her differently as well. That is my story, quite a cold one, on a cliff in blustery north of Ireland in Donegal, standing contemplating death with a ghost by your side. Fitting for my first one. It's got a lot of themes that I really like and are quite dear to me. Was it perfect? Absolutely not. Definitely not. But it was done. It was the first story that I cared enough about to properly rewrite from start to finish multiple times and actually get edited and feel in some way comfortable asking if someone wanted to publish it. It could be improved, I'm sure, but I think that for me at least, done is better than perfection. I learned so much more actually finishing this and getting it published than I did with the thousands of other stories that I have started and never followed through with, or with the millions of hours I have sat and thought about stories, because thinking does not actually get anything done and doesn't get anything written. So were all of these themes and ideas and parts of these characters translated perfectly in the exact way that I wanted them to be? No, absolutely not, but I think it was a good start for me and I definitely aim to do better in the future. I am quite proud of this, so let me know down below where you've gotten your ideas from. Are there any interesting little points in your life or just small things that you have that have sparked an interest in you and a story has grown out of them? Or if you have any similarities to how I sort of worked with this story, or any tips or tricks as well, please let me know. I am always looking to learn more about writing. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this little writing discussion I've had here. There's going to be a lot more authorship and writing videos in the future. Don't forget to join and enter the giveaway if you haven't already, and I shall see you in the next video.